do it.
All right, so before I begin, I want us to imagine something. Imagine that I hand you all a permission slip. Hey, like this one. I hand you a permission slip and I say, if you sign this permission slip, you get an automatic A in whichever class that you choose. No tricks, no gimmicks, just an automatic A. You don't even have to show up to class. Not a trick question. Would you sign this permission slip? Now, I don't want you to raise your hand because I want you to answer that question to yourself honestly. And I want you to keep that in mind because my name's Husam Alhaddad, and I'm going to be going over the pros and cons of the ABC letter grading system, and I'm going to kind of evaluate it and inform you guys because we're students and we've been affected by this through all our lives. I'm going to be going over the pros, the cons, and maybe a possible compromise in the end, but we'll have to review that as we go on. So there are indeed pros to this, whether you hate it or you love it, and a big one is motivation. It allows students to create specific and measurable goals for them to accomplish. Rather than saying, I want to do my best, they can say, I want to get an A+ in this class. I want to get a 95% on this exam. I want to get a 3.8 GPA this semester. And having that specific measurable goal forces them to reach as high as they can, where they can actually obtain it, or they get extremely close to it. Another pro is that it allows teachers for easy assessment. If we take a look at this report card, we can see where this student is excelling and where they're struggling. And since we can have this type of assessment, it's easy to compare it amongst other students. If we did a lengthy paragraph kind of assessment, there's millions of students in the US. How are we going to compare that assessment with everyone else in a short, succinct manner? It also acts as a numerical identifier when you translate it to GPA. So to say if you're going to apply to a job or grad school, they're going to be looking at your GPA. That's your ranking as a person. That's the first thing that they're going to look at. And from there, they can see whether they want to actually continue assessing you or if they just want to toss your resume out the door. Now, it's not all sunshines and rainbows about this. There's obviously a lot of flaws with this. And as I was talking about motivation, it can go the complete opposite way. A study was done in 2013 where two researchers by the name of Grant and Green hypothesized that students on the below average grading, such as C, D, and F, would actually study exponentially more for the final to kind of push them in the last effort. Well, in the results, it turns out that it did not show that. In fact, it kind of went the opposite way. It said, well, the results and the conclusion was that the students weren't really motivated at all. They did not study as much. They did not try any harder. They simply just were not motivated. And you would think they would be, but really the results were not that. They just simply were discouraged at that point. It also has a lot of black and white area. And you may recognize this because I took this from the syllabus, but I want you to take a look at these .99s right here. Now, to say if rounding is or not a thing, if it wasn't, and if you got a 79.99, guess what? You're right here in a C. Even though you're this instrumentally close to a B, guess what? You're grouped with the people who have a 70, a 71, and a 72, and so on. There's this gap, yet you're still grouped with them. And if you were allowed to get a rounded grade, now you're a B, you have an 80, but you're grouped with people who got an 89, and an 88, and an 87. That's also a large gap. They're on a higher level than you, yet you're still in that grade with them. And if we started getting more specific, using the pluses and minuses and making the grade scale as specific as possible, there's always going to be a black and white area. There's never a gray area for it to tell the whole story about a student's performance. And speaking of telling the whole story, grades don't tell the whole story. If we look at these people with their GPAs, it doesn't tell you anything about their personality. It doesn't tell you anything about their work experience, their volunteer experience, their skills, their attributes, their extracurricular activities. All this is just a number. And you say, okay, we can just compare that number, right? Well, if you compare these numbers, there's a lot of variability. You don't know which majors they're in. You don't know which classes they took. You don't know what schools they went or how vigorous those schools were. You don't know how tough those classes were, what kind of assignments they had. You don't know if it was a laid-back class or if it was a really try-hard class. So to compare these across the board, how are you going to compare them when there's so much variability? There is not enough consistency for you to just compare that and make an easy judgment. And this is the biggest takeaway that I want everyone in this room to really focus on when it comes to this, is that the ABC letter grading system encourages memorizing versus learning. I'm sure everyone here has always crammed for an exam that they thought was really important, and they just forgot about it later on. Because this grading system doesn't want you to go further up here. It only wants you to remember. This is called Bloom's taxonomy, and almost every student in the nation should know about this. And what the ABC letter grading system is doing is it's telling you, hey, do this, but after the exam, who cares? Forget about that. You don't need any of this. It doesn't even create time for you to go further because you have other classes. You have other exams. You have other things to do as a student. So is there a solution? Because I don't want to discredit the pros, neither do I want to discredit the cons, but is there a compromise? Well, a large-scale one would probably take a lot of time, but you could start implementing mastery. And what mastery is New York Times wrote an article about this. They said that there are classes and even schools across the United States which are implementing mastery into their curriculum, in which students aren't really being graded, but they are focused. They want to ensure that students are mastering their subjects so that they actually know what they're doing, so that they can actually go further beyond remembering and actually understanding and applying their knowledge rather than just simply being stuck on just memorizing. So I don't want to get rid of the ABC grading, but maybe you can implement this into your studying. You can focus on mastering so that the ABC letter grading system can still be implemented, but you can also know what you're learning rather than discarding all that information later down the line. It's not the biggest compromise, but it's a baby step. It's solving one of the cons while keeping the grading system in place. So in the meantime, I want you guys to keep asking yourself, am I learning or am I just memorizing? Is this grading system actually helping me? Is this going to be good for my kids in the future? And most importantly of all, would I sign this permission slip? Thank you.
Really good job, Sam. That was great.